Hello, welcome to Usf Transition Seminar. My name is Yu Zhang. I'm a professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering and also a faculty affiliated with the Carter Center for Urban Transition Research. And this seminar is sponsored by CE Department, Carter, and also 3 University Transition Research Center at USF, including NISA, CTEC, and TOMET. And today, I'm so glad to have 4 panelists with us, and we'll discuss the future urban air mobility in the Tampa Bay region. For those who are not familiar with this terminology, UAM, let's give a brief introduction. So urban air mobility is mentioned by NASA in 2017, but the concept actually has already been there since 2001. And this urban air mobility focuses on transporting the passengers and cargo by utilizing the low altitude urban airspace. But then later, NASA and also other government agencies found out that the UAM, the air mobility actually will not only be serving the urban area, but can also serve the regional trips as well as to the rural area that lack of the transportation services. So they extend the terminology from the urban air mobility to advanced air mobility. And let's look at what the future urban air mobility could be. And it will be on demand. It could be the shared service, and it will have more kind of direct routes from the original vertiports to the destination vertiports, and will connect it with other transition modes to achieve this multimodal transition service.
I wanted to share with you my
Sorry for the advertisement on
YouTube.
YouTube.
That is our outdoor.
Okay. I think I didn't share the sounds. Oh my God. Hello, welcome to the USF Transition Seminar. My name is Yu Zhang. I'm a professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering and also faculty affiliated with Carter Center for Urban Transition Research. So this is a seminar sponsored by the CE Department, Carter, and also 3 UTCs on USF, including NISA, CTEC, and TOMET. And it's also facilitated by the IT student chapter. So today, it's our pleasure to have 4 panelists with us to discuss the future urban air mobility in the Tampa Bay region. For those who are not familiar with the terminology urban air mobility, let's give a brief introduction. So urban air mobility is not a very new term, actually. It was started being talked about back in 2001. And then later in 2017, NASA re-emphasized urban air mobility and envisioned that as a future mode that can transport the passengers and the cargo by utilizing the low altitude urban airspace. But very soon they found out, not only NASA, but other federal and state agencies found out that this type of air mobility can not only use to serve the urban travel needs, but also the regional travel needs and serve the rural areas that lack of the transition service. So that's why, they extend this terminology from the urban air mobility to advanced air mobility. And then let's watch a very short video clip that gives kind of the vision about what future urban air mobility could be. It will be on demand and shared service and connected with the ground transportation to provide the door-to-door transition service with this multimodal urban air mobility. So there's a long way to go from where we are right now to what has been envisioned in the video clip. And the NASA actually defined the different maturity levels of UAM and what could be the barriers at each of the levels. And FAA also defined 5 areas of activities and challenges, including aircraft, airspace, operations, infrastructure, and community. And at USF, actually, the Smart Urban Air Mobility Lab is working in advanced air mobility. And the research topics include the network design and the demand estimation, including the vertiport siting, and also estimates the divergent demand from the ground transition to the air, as well as the airspace management of integrated nets and automate the air traffic service for the high density operations, and also the community integration, equity, and sustainability. And we have done some research on each of the aspects, and we are also making an effort to put them together to create this shared UAM evaluation tool that can be used by different stakeholders from both public and private sectors for different impact analysis. For example, the regional economic impact analysis, energy environmental impact analysis, and equity and accessibility impact analysis. So now let me introduce the 4 panelists. We have Gina Evans from Hillsborough County Aviation Authority, and she's the Director of the Government Affairs at HCAA. We also have Brandon Campbell with us, and he's the Smart Mobility Manager at the City of the Tampa. We also have 2 panelists from the Hillsborough County TPO, and one is Allison, and she's the Assistant Director and the Sustainability Coordinator. And we also have Roger Mathie, and he's the TPOG's project manager. So now I'm going to turn the floor to our panelists, and each of them will give a brief about the efforts that their agency has made for embracing the future urban air mobility. So Brandon Campbell will be the first presenter.
So I wanted to talk real quick, very briefly about what we see happening from the industry, what our interest is, and really kind of what we are doing about it and doing to get ready for it. There we go. You know, one of the things that's really kind of caught our attention is that whenever I see things that agencies like the FAA and NASA are taking seriously, that to me is a good indicator that it's something that we should take seriously as well. And I'll say, I really liked the video that you just showed, because it shows a vision of what is possible and what the possible future is. But we have to get from where we are now, which is, and I'm not looking out my window at downtown Tampa seeing a whole lot of drones right now, to bridge that gap to where we have a fully operational and functioning system. And we have to figure out what, as a city, what our role is within that. So sort of keeping our ear to the ground and monitoring what's going on. There are several different efforts that are simultaneously progressing, one of which is very timely. The FAA just sent out a draft engineering bulletin a couple of weeks ago. They're looking for comment on some of the design criteria for vertiports, which are different from but similar to a heliport. And there are a few things that really kind of caught my attention with this engineering bulletin, EB 105. One is that they're very focused on performance-based rather than prescriptive design standards, which is to say that they don't know exactly what form factor they're designing for. If you look at the description or several places even within that short document, they talk about how they have based their design concepts on basically a composite sketch of 9 different VTOL aircraft. And VTOL, I should say, is vertical takeoff and landing, generally assumed to be electric. There are several different manufacturers or OEMs that are seeking some level of certification, a couple of them that are some of the more prominent players and that have been in the news lately. Joby Aviation, they just reached phase 4 of a 5-part FAA certification process. I couldn't tell you what parts 1 through 3 were or how that is sequenced, but knowing that they're at somewhere that we can assume to be is, you know, 80% sort of phase of their certification tells me that they've made a lot of progress. Though you look at news that came out of another one of the larger players, which is Lilium out of Germany, and even just yesterday they made an announcement that they are pushing back their certification plans, though not by a lot. It was, they were hoping to have it certified by the end of 2024, and they're pushing it back to 2025. So what's our interest? From the city's perspective, we don't know exactly what our role is going to be. We don't know the entirety of what our role is going to be. There will be some level of regulation that comes through us, whether that's noise, whether that's zoning, whether that's whatever factor X is. But our biggest interest in it from the city standpoint is it gets people around. You might hear the terms advanced air mobility and urban air mobility sort of used interchangeably. From the way that we're describing it, at least, the urban air mobility is basically the expectation that you can get around within the urban area of, we'll say, an MSA or metropolitan statistical area. You all know we're growing like crazy. We've gone from 1.2 million to 1.1 million to 3.2 million over the last 50 years. You know, if you try to rent a U-Haul truck one way coming in to Florida, it's going to be a lot more expensive than one way going out of Florida. So we're seeing so much growth in the state and specifically in our region, and we are in favor of sort of all of the above options, whether it's scooters, e-bikes, or drones. So getting people around is really our primary and most pressing issue from our department standpoint. And so what are we doing? I mean, you mentioned the NASA AAM ecosystem working groups. We are participating in those. We're trying to engage with industry. I saw a presentation actually related to what you said, at Lake Nona a few weeks back, a couple of months ago, I guess, by Lilium, talking about what their intentions are. You know, I talked to Matt Bronfman with Lilium, formerly with the city of Orlando, and he was telling me that, you know, they're looking at most likely their initial corridors sort of following what the Brightline development is. Similar use case, but a little bit different clientele, I would say. So looking at the Palm Beach to Miami corridor, and then likely from there to Orlando, and then Orlando to Tampa. And I would anticipate others within that space sort of following suit. I think they kind of know where their demand is going to be. I anticipate that Tampa is going to be a fairly big target for this kind of mobility, based on congestion factors, based on proximity to other major destinations, and really just based on a more open regulatory and inviting environment for innovation. So we're trying to engage our local stakeholders. We're engaging with our internal departments, making sure that everyone's ready so that we sort of know what to look for, and that we keep an ear to the ground with respect to how the industry is progressing. So with that, I don't want to take too much time, and I will pass it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Brandon. We will keep the questions at the end. We'll hold the questions at the end for all the panelists. So now let's give the floor to Gina Evans, and she's the Director of Government Affairs at HCAA, which means Hillsborough County Aviation Authority.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be with all of you, talking about one of our most exciting topics right now. The Tampa International Airport in the Aviation Authority, which we own 3 other airports, Peter Knight on Davis Island, Tampa Executive over by the Hard Rock, and Plant City Municipal out in Plant City. And our Director of General Aviation, who runs those other 3 airports, and myself are heading up the internal task force that we have set up for how are we going to integrate AAM into our facility. And obviously, Brandon hit on a lot of the highlights of where the FAA is right now. We are closely watching those documents, and we will be making comments ourselves. We've also taken a different approach of meeting with all of the companies. So what we did is we invited the Liliums, the Jobies, all of the major players in the space to come in and tell us, not pitch us, but they were to answer specific questions of how do they see themselves operating. They all have different, each company has a little bit of a different take on what their needs would be, and we want to assess that. One of the things that is going to be very interesting from the FAA perspective is how are these vehicles integrated into the airspace. Here in Florida specifically, we have a very crowded airspace, especially when you go from I-4 south. It is the only area that has 4 large hub airports pretty much on top of each other, with us in Orlando and Miami and Fort Lauderdale. And then you add in MacDill, you add in St. Pete Clearwater, you add in all of the other airspace. It's a very crowded airspace. And the FAA is trying to figure out how to integrate drones right now into the airspace, just regular drones, let alone passenger drones. The interesting piece for us as well is that we're trying to figure out where on our property these should be located. Some of you may know that Lilium has partnered with Faa Reauthorization, which is a company that's a real estate company, basically, that they want to design the stations for Lilium. Does that make sense? Or does something like what we have with the Consolidated Rental Car Center make sense, that we own it and lease it? How are these going to be qualified by the FAA? Are they going to be classified as commercial air service? Are they going to be classified as helicopters? Is it going to be a new emerging technology? And so there's still a lot of unknown questions for us, but we are very excited about the technology. And I can tell you our CEO has made this a priority for us. Aside from the passenger drone, which I know is the main focus today, we see this being integrated into the cargo space before it goes into the passenger space. UPS has a very robust program of how they see it integrating. Amazon, you see a lot of the airlines and a lot of these companies investing in this technology. If any of you have tried to fly to Tallahassee lately, it's not that easy with the schedules. And so do these replace regional routes? Do these AAMs end up being what those small and medium airports, maybe small airports, does that replace some of that air service? I was talking to a United pilot about that back in January of, does that replace the short hops that you would have like 7 people and then you would get to another place and 6 more people would get on, but that's not really profitable for an airline. But so how does that integrate? And then where, again, on our campus, how do we see this? We see this for the future. And we're in the plans right now. Every 7 years, we are mandated by the FAA to plan for our growth for the next 7 years. And we are in the middle of that process right now. And so we have our master plan consultant, Recondo and Associates, looking at all of this. One thing that's interesting for next week is at our board meeting on Tuesday, we are actually putting in a policy for the zoning of these, very high level, but as many of you know, we control you may or may not be aware that we control the height zoning for everything in the area. So we've got a tower on Bayshore, a new residential tower that's being zoned at the time, but at the same time, we will also be updating these so that when these companies do come in, we have some framework in place for them to operate under. Like I said, we're very excited about the technology. I think, as I'm sure many of you know, we embrace technology, we embrace innovation. We want to be the first to do a lot of things, whether it is, the automation or emerging technologies such as the eVTOL, or or building a giant flamingo. We'll do all of it. And so we look forward to continuing the conversation with all the partners and really are excited for the opportunities with FAA. And one other thing that I think is going to be something to keep an eye on for the next 2 years, FAA reauthorization expires in 2023. And so we are already talking with the chairs and ranking members of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee in DC, as well as the Aviation Subcommittee, on what does that look like? Because we all do believe that Congress is going to get involved in this. One of the main concerns from Garrett Graves, who's from Louisiana and the ranking member on the Aviation Subcommittee, is the grid, that once you start electrifying so many things, and whether it's eVTOL, whether it's there's electrification of cars for the rental car centers, or all of those things, of making sure that our power grids can sustain this technology and are prepared for electrification in general. We also again see the opportunities through that to kind of work together with these operators. There's also a bill that will most likely pass Congress by the end of the year, setting up a workforce, I'm sorry, a task force to look at these things. Same thing with at the state level. The bill, unfortunately, the piece of legislation died the last day of session to set up the statewide task force, but working with our friends at FDOT to see what that looks like as well. And so we really look forward to the conversations. And like I said, we're leaning into this big time, and we are really excited to see where the technology goes.
Great. Thank you so much, Gina, for sharing all this information. And I know the FDOT will set up a task force inviting different stakeholders to start to come together and discuss, because to embrace such a new mode, there are so many aspects needs to be considered. So it's a complicated system that we're talking about. Thank you so much, Gina. Okay, let's move to Allison Ye. And Allison, she's an assistant director and also sustainability coordinator at the Hillsborough County TPO. And also we'll have Roger Mathie with us, and he's the TPOG's project manager. So they will work together and show us the status of the MPO's efforts on the emerging urban air mobility.
Hi, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Zhang, for letting us have the opportunity to speak about this project. So Roger, my colleague, the GIS manager, will talk right after me, and we'll give you a quick demo of our pilot project with NASA. It's actually, we're working with someone at a parallel effort with everything that we see going on here. So we're going to give you a little sample of what we've been working on. We went through this in the beginning when Dr. Zhang gave a preview, but air taxis are generally thought of as an on-demand point-to-point travel service between regional and general aviation airports. And what I learned was that the concept was first actually tested by NASA as early as 2001 as part of the Small Aircraft Transportation System Initiative, SATS. I'm not going to go over their definition again, but I did put on this slide, and I'll share this with you later, some documentation that you might be interested in looking at on the FAA site, including the 501 vertiport design brief that Brandon was talking about. And then there's also being worked on a concept of operations. So that would speak to how the vehicles might actually travel in the airspace. So how did the MPO get started with all this? Back in July 2020, the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council completed an innovation transit technology study, and they looked at 3 modes of innovative transit at that time. So that was aerial gondolas, that's being looked at in Pinellas County, air taxis, and Hyperloop. One of the study recommendations was for TBARTA to collaborate with NASA on modeling what they did related to air taxis. So I think concurrently NASA was already developing a GIS-based urban air mobility regional modeling tool. And so they were looking at different sites around the country. I think Ohio was one of them, LA was one of them, and Tampa Bay was also on the list where they wanted to test the tool because they wanted to talk to the TPO because we have a little more experience in mapping and data expertise. So we collaborated with TBARTA and Dr. Kipio Chef. He's out of the Ames lab in California to develop a beta test model. And it's actually customized specifically for Hillsborough County. The link for this report is on TBARTA site, so should you wish to peruse more. just a little bit of background on what they found. I think it's interesting to our discussion is that they looked at 3 vehicles. I think the multi-rotor one we saw a video of earlier, but they're both, the range is approximately 50 to 70 minutes for 2 of them. And for the multi-rotor, it's about up to 25 minutes. Maximum speeds can go up to 180 miles and as low as 80 miles per hour. They don't know the headway at this point and fairly modest vehicle capacity, up to 4 people, as if we're talking about passengers. And they all require some sort of, electrification. There's infrastructure needs that go along with them. Right now, the report is saying that a typical vertiport might cost 113 million, and vehicles can range anywhere from 280 to 480,000. So it gives you a little sense of what we're looking at. I should note that as part of the study, they looked at intermodal centers, and they looked at what the demand would be in the counties. So looking at the intermodal centers in West Shore, downtown, and USF area, they looked at the travel demand. You'll see that USF to downtown is a high demand corridor, as well as some activity center connections from USF to Ybor, USF to downtown St. Pete, USF to Gateway, USF to downtown Clearwater. So clearly a lot of activity coming out of USF. And, being a tier 1 listed here means that they feel like there's viable travel, can be viable travel between these activity centers. So as a planner, I have to touch on some planning concerns, and this was kind of brought up in a few of the other presentations, but there is a group called CAMI. They're a Community Air Mobility Initiative. They're a nonprofit, but what they're trying to do is they're trying to bring acceptance of urban air mobility at the state and local level. So they're thinking about how to work with the community for acceptance. And, some really high level concepts we talked about earlier is how do you fit that into the multimodal transportation system? If it's for transit, is that first mile, last mile? Is there a medical use case? Something that has to be an integral part of it is identifying and mitigating societal barriers and equity concerns. So as planners, we have some levers that we could use, like long-range policies and planning. That would be our community plans, our capital improvement plans, our land use overlays, zoning, and our long-range transportation plans. So all the pre-planning that we do. And I thought they brought out some really, CAMI brought out some really important considerations. One of the most important parts in my view, is the public acceptance. So those have components like trust. People have to feel the vehicles are safe, the infrastructure is safe, and operations is secure. Is there a public benefit? Emergency services could be one use case that would be a benefit. We talked about increased travel options, and also it could be an economic generator. How do we integrate that into existing transit and roads like Brandon talked about? I think we're just at the cusp of that right now. What's the grid capacity if everything is electrified? There's electric vehicles. Now we have electric, electric vertiport vehicles. And then what about the social equity? In the beginning, you saw how expensive the vehicles are, and they only take 4 passengers. So how do we reconcile that? There's also limiting adverse impacts. There's going to be noise impacts and visual impacts. As quiet as they are, it's a matter of what type of acceptance there is. And there's probably emissions benefits. And also there's the privacy aspect. Where will these vehicles be flying? So where are we now with the TPO? So we collaborated with NASA and developed the beta test model customized for Hillsborough County. The tools uses kind of an algorithm in combination with local land use, zoning, and transportation with demographic data. Ideally, we feel these air taxi sites should be located where they provide the most benefit for public, including access to major destinations and connections to other systems. In addition, the flight paths, it's not a 2-dimensional planning, right? We have to consider existing structures, the flight paths, and you'll see a little bit of that in the tool. And so we actually, as part of these concurrent efforts, we actually demonstrated the tool to local jurisdictions, and Brandon was there and Gina was there. So Tampa, Plant City, the Aviation Authority, and Thea were all helping us test out this tool. And we're doing this because we know that several of these agencies have been approached by private operators, and you've been talking to private operators, and we're hoping this tool you're going to see in a minute will help be a preliminary evaluation of whether a site is suitable or not. There's going to be a lot more tweaking to that, but that's what we initially want to do. So right now, the TPO has control of the tool where we have a user agreement with NASA that we can help local governments do analysis. So this is a little preview of what you'll see. You're going to see this grid that's a network. This is the area we're going to analyze. So we input the land use and transportation data, create this grid, and it will tell us where we can compute the suitability of vertiports. And so using the values you see there, they'll be customized and weighted, and a location is selected that will generate a composite suitability score. And when we go into demo, you'll see all the factors that go into it, like fire stations, medical center, where the power grid is, where the central business district is. And we can do that for every, multiple locations and repeat it for that. So we're going to get going in a minute. I'm going to turn this over to Roger, and we can take questions on it afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks, Allison.
Hi, everybody. My name is Roger Mathie. I'm the GIS project manager for the Hillsborough TPO, and I'm going to share my screen here.
Thank you.
All right, so here is the tool that we are working with NASA. You can see the area here of Hillsborough County. I'll turn on the mesh, zoom in a little bit. And you can see, if I zoom in a little closer, you can see that it's aligned almost perfectly with the south boundary of Hillsborough County and the east boundary over here. And we're going to turn on vertiport locations. These with the V are the actual sites that we're looking at. So when I initially picked these sites out, they actually are the activity centers within Hillsborough County. And we'll zoom into downtown at an area that we're looking at. And this particular site right here happens to be in the parking garage of next to Amalie Arena. And we got the attributes that are right here. So over here on the left are the different attributes that we plugged into this tool. All good things to help select a viable spot for a vertiport. Let's say you want to look at fire stations. There's a fire station right up here on the north end of downtown. So if you zoom back out, you could see all the fire stations within the Hillsborough County and the region. We'll zoom back in here. So you do want to keep these vertiports near a fire station and possible medical centers, just in case there's an accident. Hopefully that's not the case. And then we'll look at medical centers here. And you can see TGH right here on Davis Island. And we'll zoom back in here. And we also have building structures for the area here. So I could turn on the buildings and see the 3D display. So we can click on here. The blue dot means this is of what's active, what you're actually looking at. So it's sitting right here. So all the attributes that you saw on the left now pop up on the right and show you all the suitability factors that go into seeing if this is a viable spot. Like the fire station's roughly 3,400 feet away from a fire station. Looking at your medical centers, you're about just under a mile or just over a half a mile to the hospital. And there are a couple of other spots that's being looked at within this downtown area. There's a possible site here on the Forper Garage at the city of Tampa. And these were all of their factors that make up in this here for the report. Let's see, then this site right here is what the Expressway Authority is looking at as a possible location for them. The idea is to keep it multimodal so that when you do arrive at a specific vertiport, there are other modes of transportation to connect to. So once this selection is done, then you can come down here and see the suitability factor, which red is bad, green is good. You can turn on the composite suitability. Zoom back out here. Anything that you see in red would be populated residential areas, but we took out all the residential areas before we started putting all this information into the tool, as their possible air corridors are looking at probably around the interstates, the expressways, and some of your major roads. And then if you do want to see the report, you click on the little icon here, and then this window will pop up. So your composite suitability for this area on top of the parking garage in Amalie Arena is 0.44, which is good. It comes up with a picture of the area, your vertiport here selected in blue. So these are all your factors that you see in it, and the 0.44 would probably, it's supposed to show up right in here. So as you get closer going to the left, as you get into these guys here, which these are not good, you want to try to keep it from like 0.3 to 0.45 is excellent. 0.15 to 0.3 is definitely good. Those are good areas to look at. And let's see, let me close this window here. I'll zoom back out, turn off the suitability. So also, if you want to see I'll turn the buildings off also, and then we'll look at the transit routes, the bus routes. Here we go. Bus stations, bus routes. There we go. So here's our bus route network. Then you could see where they, depending on where a vertiport site is selected, you see that they do have connections to the bus routes. And we also have an area up here near University Mall that we're looking at also. And if you click on that, then you can see the suitability factor is 0.23, which is definitely a good area to have one. Click on the report. And then you can see the yellow bar right here falls 0.22. So anything from the right is excellent. And then from the left over to 0.15 is a good area, but anything beyond that would not be good. And then we can print this out and we'll close this. There's also one other thing I wanted to show you, and that is the surfaces. Now this here, if you zoom in, this is the incoming and outgoing of the landing areas, and then you could also move it around and see the different, based on the wind direction is what they're gonna be for incoming and outgoing for vertical takeoff and landings. And then if we zoom back into downtown here, all right, well, looks like the connection here is starting to go. So I will leave it with you guys and send this back to you. Any questions?
Great, thank you. Thank you, Roger, for demonstrating this tour with us and show different functions. I think this is very comprehensive tool that can, give this suitability analysis. Okay, so I want to thank all 4 panelists for the presentation. And now I think we can open the floor to the audience for questions towards our panelists. So for the audience, you can unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can put your question in the meeting chat. And we already have the champion who puts the first one. Okay, so Donna Manzer, and she asked, does the shown suitability factor vertiport takes into consideration all criteria in terms of connectivity to other modes and optimization of supply chain to the forecasted demand, or it is only based on the physical suitability of the vertiport only?
Roger, you can go first, or I can take it.
You can, if you want to, if you're ready to go.
Sure. So if Roger, we don't have it up right now, but we take in more than physical considerations. So NASA had inputted like the wind speed, the noise, the flight paths already. What we did was we did put in transit routes. We actually also have in there equity areas as well that we can turn on that factor, off that factor. I don't think we have supply chain, but we definitely have transit, and we could put in sidewalks if that made sense, or trails. But what I'm getting at is that that's the part that the community can customize. And then they can customize what they put in, as well as the weighing factor for that. How important is that for, the suitability rating? So you could, but I know supply chain considerations, like we don't have freight routes in there right now. I hope that answered your question, Dana.
Roger, do you have anything to add? Okay, to follow up this question, actually, Roger and Allison, I was wondering, if the vertiport is possibly be put on the roof top of the building, how about the feasibility of doing that? Consider the building structure is
It
considered
does.
here.
Yeah, so there's no building layer for the other parts of the county, but in downtown there is. So the flight path he shows would consider the building, the structures around it. I don't know if we can get the flight.
Is there a weighting system in considering different criteria? How do you weight the importance of the different aspects?
I have to get to Dr. Chefs on that one. I don't. Well, how does the flight path rate and suitability? I'm not sure how the flight path rates, because we weighted the land use and transportation factors, but we actually didn't control this aspect you're seeing, the flight path. That was
okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe next time we can invite Doctor from NASA to give us a presentation to discuss the details about this. Let's move on, because we have more questions in the meeting chat. So second question is from Jacques Colin, and asked, as you mentioned, the community acceptance of this new mobility option is a key component of the ability to move AAM, UAM ahead in our local communities. Has any public outreach community engagement activities in regards to AAM occurred yet in the Tampa area? If so, what has the public response been?
So I forgot, I wanted to mention during my presentation that, Brian Pizarro, Cutter alumni, had worked with us. And I think T-BARTA, he's with T-BARTA now, he's the one that's been doing the initial community integration. So the group I mentioned, CAMI, the Community Air Mobility Initiative, that's at the beginning phases. So as far as the TPO involvement right now, we're doing this technical aspect. I think the public involvement will probably be best be with Tampa and Aviation Authority and the Hillsborough County. I don't know, Brandon, you've been doing a lot of outreach with the community so far.
So at this point, we have not. I mean, I would characterize our communication plan at this point as still trying to inform our internal stakeholders. So I don't know that everyone, even within the city, is fully aware of what the possibilities are. But we definitely don't have a clear picture of even, I would say, the probabilities, because there are so many unknowns. So we're kind of in this holding pattern, or straddling the fence between being sort of the prophet in the wilderness saying, prepare the way for advanced air mobility, and saying this is what we're seeing in the industry and this is what we expect might happen. We don't want to get out so far in front of the trajectory of the industry that we create some sort of a false impression with the community of what's going to happen. So managing those expectations is going to be a challenge for us. And even, I mean, like I said, even as of this week, we're seeing timelines extended and changed from the OEM's perspective. So there's going to be a balancing act between trying not to get out so far in advance of what they're able to do, while still giving people adequate notice that these things can be expected.
And I was going to say, John, I can appreciate how hard that is because, you know, even when we started this project, it's been like December 2020, it was all over the news. So it felt like vertiports would be here in a year or two. And there is just a lot of, the private sector has been promoting it quite a bit. So it does feel like it's closer than maybe it really is.
Yeah.
Roger, may I ask you to stop sharing your screen?
Sure.
So that, yeah, I think the bandwidth is kind of challenging.
Okay.
Yeah, we have more questions related to the suitability modeling, but you know, we have other questions towards the other panelists as well. So there's one question is more kind of towards Brandon, because we agree that to make the future UAM more sustainable, it will be shared. So I was wondering, when you think about the city's role in the future urban air mobility, have you thought about how you are managing the shared micromobility? For example, you sign the contract with the operators and provide the permit for them so that they can start their operations in the city, and the city actually plays very important role in terms of that. And do you foresee that city could play similar roles in the future urban air mobility?
Yeah, I think it depends a little bit on how it's rolled out. I think anytime that there is a vertiport located on city-owned property, it's not going to be for exclusive use of one provider. And how that actually is regulated, or how we roll that out is still, again, a little bit fuzzy. I think also Gina might have a good perspective on that too, just given federal funding for some of their operations and what the requirements for them will be. But I will say that I'll turn it over to her in a second. But I'll say that anything that we own is probably going to be treated in a similar manner to what the Aviation Authority owns.
Thank you, Brandon. And that's a really good point. And that's like one of the things is that federal restrictions say that we have to treat everybody fairly and that you have to have an operating agreement to operate at the airport. So what that looks like, we're not sure yet. Again, it goes into how do these things end up being classified? If they go into more of a traditional airspace, like an airplane aeronautical use, then they would have to go through airline real estate, and they would have to have an airline agreement with us, where if they are not categorized that way, it could look like something like our contracts with our general aviation. And what are those specifications? I think we are more leaning towards we want to own I shouldn't say that. I should say we're looking at the options of whether we want to own where they are or whether we want to do it more like an FBO, where like one of the fixed base operators, if you've ever been to one of the general aviation airports, with specific guidelines, because again, we want to control the guest experience. As you all know, that's something that we pride ourselves on. And so we want to make sure that it's up to our standards. The FAA is handling it from the safety and performance side, but what do those standards look like for our guest experience? And I think that we're ways out on that. As far as community outreach right now, as part of our master plan process where we have our community meetings, we are informing our stakeholders and the public that we're looking at this, but obviously we won't have any of that, any of the details on that until that master plan process is complete later this year.
Ken Sai says, Allison, Nick Patel, Sarasota city engineer, and I are informally looking for vertiport sites in Sarasota and would also like to be put in contact with Dr. Shill from NASA. So I think Allison's email address will be available. And Ken, I will share that with you and you can contact Allison later. And let's see, do we have any other questions? Okay. Do we have other questions from audience, either online or in the classroom? I want to
sh-
say, yes, go ahead.
Sure. I think I just have a question. You know, it's great that I see that, you know, different organizations, the MPO, county and city, and also the airport are moving towards the same direction. So I just wonder, would there be some mechanism or protocols to work across different agencies to promote emerging technologies like eVTOL and really, I mean, to sort of like streamline the process and make it tested or implemented as soon as possible. Thank you.
So, Brandon and you might know better, but the DOT has a Smart Cities Alliance group and a leadership group as well. I'm sure Gina is also involved in that, but that seems like the forum for this type of technology. I think for the TPO, we're simply providing the tool right now. So, but really the hard work, unfortunately, rests with the city and the Aviation Authority and Hillsborough County.
Yes, and I think a lot of that's going to be dictated by the FAA. I think
Yeah.
that when you start talking about this, a lot of that is resting at the federal government because there's integration at all levels. Like it's great that you're hearing this presentation from the 3 local agencies today, but once you start getting into these different jurisdictions, you have to be coordinated at the state and federal level. And so I think the FAA is the most poised to set up some of that framework. But I also think that the working group that FDOT is going to put together will look at how the state is considering this and what other state regulations or not or avoidances how do you preempt, you know, we don't want another like Uber Lyft fight. So how much of this where you're having different rules in each local government? So how much of this is preempted to the federal government, then how much of it is preempted to the state before the local governments can really put in their own regulations? But again, sharing information like we all do is critical.
Yeah, I would say too, you mentioned the Tampa Bay Smart Cities Alliance, and that may be a great place for us as we get close to implementation. But right now, being at a more conceptual level, we're not quite ready for that. So good suggestion whenever it's time.
Yes, as I mentioned, the Assistant Secretary of FDOT actually is organizing a task force with all different stakeholders, and I believe FAA, the local office in our region will also be invited, and the airport and the aviation and the spaceport office at FDOT will play a very important role in coordinating the efforts. So hopefully in the next several months, we will see there are more conversations among different agencies and stakeholders. Yeah. Donna in the meeting chat says she had an internet interruption, and she's asking, has there been a study regarding a model to compute the capacity of vertiports for cities and capacity in terms of fleet number and active routes at certain time and space?
Yeah, I answered her. I think the T-Barter report gets into some of the demand and also the vehicle specifications, but not to the level that you're talking about right now. On the T-Barter report was also regional. I mean, we just pulled out the Hillsborough County information for this talk.
And I can add on that. Actually, we are doing research in this direction, and we developed a simulation tool to simulate the operations of the future urban air mobility, looking into 3 objects: vertiport, eVTOL, and the passengers. So, and the next step, actually, what we are going to do is the simulation optimization. And with the simulation optimization, we can compute the optimum capacity of each of the vertiport, and also what will be the size of the fleet to meet the needs in the Tampa Bay region. So stay tuned. Once we get the results, we can share with you, Donna.
I was going to say, if the urban plan, I know there was at least one urban planner in the audience, and Dr. Lee is another one, but the CAMI link I put, they really are developing a guidebook for the planning aspect, the community aspect, but they already have a lot of training videos out there. I just pulled a very small portion of what they're talking about. But if you're interested in that, go to the link and there's videos and just a lot of discussion regarding the kind of public acceptance side and, what that might mean for the community.
Yeah, and for your information, there are quite a lot of conferences organized around the urban air mobility concept. There's one will be in San Francisco on August 2nd and 3rd, which I was invited to moderate session and also present there. That is called the Future of Aviation, sponsored by TRB and also other companies. So if you're interested, I can share the information in the meeting chat later. Okay, I think the time is up, but let's see if our panelists have final remarks for our audience.
Just thank you for the opportunity to discuss this. I mean, it's been a really great conversation.
Agreed. We're really excited about how this really truly unfolds. And it's exciting to really have a role in it too.
I could not agree more with what Allison and Brandon said. I think that it's exciting to be a part of it. It's exciting to see where it goes, and all just going to be, the next 3 years will go by fast. So, if Lilium stays on that track, it's going to be a very fast moving pace, hopefully. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you all for being here. Roger, do you have anything?
Echo the same sentiments as everybody else, and working with Dr. Sheth from NASA and plugging all this information into the tool and getting a chance to show you guys how it works. It's great.
Great. I mean, thank you so much for being here to share the information, and also thank you all for the efforts that your agencies are doing, to possibly make this could be a future mode for us that we can enjoy and gain the benefits from. Thank you so much. And audience, thank you so much for being here. We actually have a big audience today with lots of external audience from outside. Again, thank you so much. Thank all the panelists and audience. We have another urban air mobility session on 15th. So welcome everybody on 15th. And of course, we will have a regular seminar next week as well. Okay,
Yeah.
so great. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to
Thank
the speakers and panelists again. Next week, we're going to have Dr. Lingxi Li from Purdue University and Indiana University at the Indianapolis. He's going to talk about connected automated vehicles, sensing. Thank you. Hope you have a great weekend.